Number 10. Stirling Bridge, 9/11, 1297. The Wallace Ambush. A narrow wooden bridge across the River Forth, barely wide enough for two horsemen to ride abreast. On one side of that river, a proud English army of around 9,000 men, veterans professional soldiers, Welsh archers, mailed knights. On the other side, a Scottish force perhaps 6,000 strong, most of them commoners with long spears, gathered on a rise called Abbey Craig. They are led by two men the English do not take seriously. Andrew Moray, a young nobleman still bleeding from his own campaign, and William Wallace, a giant of a man whose name means, to the English administration, nothing more than a criminal irritation. Watching from the English side is Hugh de Cressingham, the treasurer of English-occupied Scotland, a man so hated by the Scots that his very name is a curse in the mouths of the poor. Cressingham has flayed prisoners. He has squeezed the country of every coin. He now stands in gleaming mail on the bank of the Forth, impatient, sneering, telling his commander, John de Warenne, the Earl of Surrey, to stop wasting time and cross the bridge. Warenne is more cautious. A local knight, Sir Richard Lundy, has already begged him not to send men across a bottleneck that could murder an army. Lundy knows a nearby ford where 60 horsemen can cross abreast. Warenne listens. Cressingham overrules him. Money, he insists, must not be wasted feeding this army another day. And so, on the morning of 9/11, the English begin filing across the bridge, two at a time, into the loop of the river beyond. Wallace and Moray wait. They watch. They count. They let hundreds of English soldiers accumulate on the north bank, backed against the water with only that narrow bridge as their route back. And then, when the number is exactly right, when there are enough men across to be destroyed, but not enough to overwhelm the Scots, the Schiltrons charge. Long spears lowered, roaring down the slope, they slam into the English vanguard and drive it back against the Forth. Scottish light troops sprint to the bridge itself and seize its northern end. The English on the wrong bank realize in a single collective moment of horror that they cannot retreat. Cressingham is dragged from his horse. The commoners he has bled dry for years fall on him with knives. He is butchered on the mud he came to collect taxes from. Behind him, thousands of men-at-arms and infantry are speared, drowned in the river, or hacked to death in the marshy loop. Walter of Gisborough would put English losses at 100 knights and 5,000 infantry. Sir Marmaduke Twang, one of the few English knights who kept his head, cuts his way back across the bridge and escapes. Warenne, watching from the south bank with his remaining army, panics. He orders the bridge burned and flees for Berwick. And then comes the moment that shocks Europe. Cressingham's body is not simply left, it is stripped and flayed. The Lanarcoast Chronicle records in horrified detail that the Scots dried and cured his hide. Small strips are cut and distributed to Scottish soldiers as souvenirs of the tax collector they hated. And William Wallace, according to that same chronicle, has a broad strip cut from head to heel and fashioned into a baldric, a sword belt, from which he hangs his own blade. The treasure of Scotland becomes the harness of the rebel. Stirling Bridge shatters. For the first time in a European lifetime, the myth that armored knights cannot be broken by peasant spearmen. Andrew Moray, gravely wounded in the fighting, will die of his wounds 2 months later. Wallace will be made Guardian of Scotland. And the English will discover to their horror that a Scottish farm boy with a 12-foot spear and a good position is worth 10 mailed men on horses picking their way across a bridge. But Stirling was a trap. The next battle, 5 years later, would be worse, because the next time, the peasants did not need a river, they only needed a swamp. Number 9. Courtrai, the Battle of the Golden Spurs, July 11th, 1302. The town of Courtrai in Flanders, in what is now Belgium. The French have made a mistake so profound, it will echo for 200 years. Flanders is rich. Its towns weave the wool of England into cloth so fine the courts of Europe compete for it. But Flanders is also proud, and the King of France, Philip IV, has decided that pride must end. He has taxed the towns, insulted the Count, and stationed a French garrison in the castle of Courtrai. On May 18th, 1302, in the pre-dawn dark, the Bruges militia rises. Weavers, fullers, and butchers with knives and clubs move door to door, house to house, asking every man they find one question in the local Flemish dialect. Those who cannot pronounce the words are murdered on the spot. By dawn, 120 French soldiers and Flemish patricians who have sided with the king lie dead in the streets of Bruges. The event is called the Bruges Matins. It is not a rebellion. It is a massacre. And it demands a response so severe it will terrify all of Europe into obedience. Philip's response arrives in the person of Robert II, Count of Artois, at the head of the finest army the French crown can raise. Thousands of professional knights, Genoese crossbowmen, nobility from every province of France, the very definition of an unbeatable feudal army. Against him, the Flemish towns assemble something that has no name in any military textbook of the age. Around 9,000 men, mostly infantry, drawn from craft guilds, the weavers of Bruges, under Peter de Koninck, a man so small he has to be lifted onto a barrel to be heard, the butchers of Bruges, under Jan Breidel, contingents from Ghent, from Ypres, from Kortrijk itself, almost no cavalry, almost no professional soldiers, just angry townspeople carrying a weapon most Frenchmen have never seen before, the Guten Tag, a stout wooden pole, 5 feet long, capped with iron, and topped with a single vicious spike. Cheap, simple, devastating. The Flemings pick their ground with genius. A field crossed by 2 streams, the Groninge and the Grote Beek, and by ditches full of muddy water. They dig more ditches. They plant stakes. They set their crossbowmen and their Guten Tag wielders in dense, tight formations behind these obstacles and wait. When Robert of Artois sees them, he laughs. This, he tells his knights, will be a matter of one charge. On July 11th, just before noon, that charge begins, and the marshy ground begins to eat horses. The French cavalry, encumbered by mail and plate, splash across the stream's hooves, sinking into the churned earth. They cannot gather speed. They cannot deliver the shock charge that has broken every enemy of France for a century. And as they flounder, the Flemings surge forward with those wooden clubs, those butcher's knives, those Guten Dags, and drag the knights from their saddles. Guy of Nemours, commanding the Flemish left, has given his men one order that day. Any man wearing golden spurs is to be killed. No ransoms, no prisoners. This is not war as chivalry understands it. This is extermination. Robert of Artois himself, seeing his knights being butchered like cattle, personally leads a desperate charge into the Flemish center. His horse is speared. He is dragged into the mud. His guards fall around him. He is clubbed to death. When the fighting ends, roughly 3 hours after it began, the flower of French nobility lies in the marsh. More than 70 great lords are dead. The annals of Ghent records the horror in a single sentence that would haunt French chroniclers for generations. The beauty and strength of that great army, it says, was turned into a dung pit, and the glory of the French was made dung and worms. Then, in the eerie silence after slaughter, the Flemings do something that will name the battle forever. They walk among the dead knights and strip the gilded, jeweled riding spurs from their heels. When they are finished, they have collected around 500 to 700 pairs of golden spurs, every one of them belonging to a dead French nobleman. These spurs are gathered up, carried to the church of Our Lady in Kortrijk, and hung from its walls like trophies of a hunt. A weaver's town has hung the aristocracy of France on its church walls. The message crosses the Alps in weeks. Knights are not invincible. Never again. Flanders will pay for its arrogance eventually. In 1382, King Charles VI of France will retake the town and recover the spurs. But the point has been made, hammered into every court in Christendom. And to this day, the 11th of July is a public holiday in Flanders. It commemorates the day the weavers and the butchers annihilated the finest cavalry in Europe. Golden spurs was not a fluke. It was a formula. And 12 years later, that formula would be repeated at scale on a wider field against the greatest army England had ever sent north. That story is next. Number 8. Bannockburn, June 23rd and 24th, 1314. Beneath the shadow of Stirling Castle in central Scotland, the largest army England has ever put into Scotland is grinding its way north. King Edward II of England commands somewhere between 15,000 and 25,000 men. Knights in the finest plate their fathers could buy them. Welsh longbowmen, thousands of foot soldiers, a baggage train so long it stretches for miles behind him. Their mission is simple: relieve the siege of Stirling Castle. the last major English stronghold in Scotland, and finally crush Robert the Bruce, the ragged king who has spent 8 years chasing the English out of his country. Waiting for them, in the boggy Carsland where the Bannockburn winds through soft ground toward the Forth, is Bruce himself with perhaps 6,000 to 8,000 men. Almost all of them are infantry. Farmers, townsmen, herdsmen, drilled for months into 4 tight circular formations of long spears called schiltrons. Each schiltron is a walking porcupine of steel points. The king's own men from Carrick under Bruce, the men of Ross and the north under Thomas Randolph, Earl of Moray, men of Buchan, Mar, Angus, and Galloway under Bruce's brother Edward, borderers under James Douglas. In front of them, Bruce has dug small, concealed pits and covered them with brush. Behind them, dense woods to hide their real numbers. On the first day, June 23rd, a young English knight named Sir Henry de Bohun rides ahead of the English vanguard. He spots Bruce alone, unarmored, except for a small helmet checking his lines from a small horse. Bohun sees a chance for personal immortality, the champion who killed the rebel king. He couches his lance and charges. Bruce, on his little horse, waits. He does not run. At the last instant, he sidesteps the lance, rises in his stirrups, and brings a battle axe down through Bohun's helmet, splitting the young English knight's skull to the collarbone. Bruce rides back to his men. His only comment, to those who scold him for risking his life, is a mild complaint that he has broken the shaft of a good axe. On the second day, June 24th, the English chivalry rides out to redeem itself. They cross the Bannockburn in the dawn light and try to deploy on a narrow strip of boggy Carsland between the woods and the water. There is no room to maneuver. There is no ground for a proper charge. The Earl of Gloucester, insulted by Edward's suggestion that he wants a day to rest, throws his life away in the opening charge. He slams into Edward Bruce's schiltron. His horse is speared. He is dragged down and killed. Around him die Sir Edmund de Mauley, Sir John Comyn, Sir Payne de Tiptoft, Sir Robert de Clifford, and hundreds more. The schiltrons do not stay still. They move. They advance. This is the horror the English do not expect. Bruce has drilled his farmers into an aggressive mobile porcupine that pushes the English cavalry back into the infantry behind them. The Welsh archers try to fire over the heads of the melee and hit their own men. Bruce's light horse charges the archers and scatters them. And now the ground itself begins to eat the English army. Their heavy horses stumble into hidden pits. Their infantry is packed so tight in the narrow field they cannot swing weapons. And then, from a nearby hill, appears what looks like a fresh Scottish army. In reality, it is Bruce's camp followers, servants, cooks and boys, waving banners and blankets on poles. To the exhausted English, they look like a whole new army arriving. Panic ripples through the front runs into the second line runs into the rear. And a river of terrified men-at-arms and horses breaks and stampedes for the Bannockburn behind them. The stream is not deep, but its banks are steep, and its bed is soft, and thousands of men in armor plunge into it and cannot climb out. Contemporary accounts describe men crossing the water dry-shod on the bodies of drowned Englishmen. King Edward II is dragged from the field by his personal bodyguard. He gallops to Stirling Castle. Its governor, a wiser man, refuses to let him in. Edward flees on to Dunbar and escapes back to England in a fishing boat, a king running from farmers. English losses at Bannockburn are estimated between 4,000 and 15,000 men. Some 34 English barons and knights are killed outright. Hundreds more are captured for ransom. Scottish losses are perhaps 500. Bannockburn is not the end of Scotland's wars, but it is the moment when English claims of overlordship become laughable and when the schiltron, the peasant spear formation, becomes the terror of every knight in Europe. Yet the schiltron was the flat country's answer to the knight. In the high mountains, another set of peasants was learning a different, colder trick, and they were waiting in a pass beside a lake. Number 7. Morgarten, November 15th, 1315. High above the mist of central Switzerland, the mountains around Lake Egerri are already frosted with early winter. A narrow track threads between the steep slope of the Figland Flue and the swampy margin of the lake. And along that track, in a column stretching for more than half a mile, rides an Austrian army led by Duke Leopold I of Austria. Duke Leopold is 25 years old, ambitious, called Leopold the Glorious, the sword of the Habsburgs. He has come to teach a lesson to a rabble of Swiss peasants who have raided the Habsburg-protected abbey of Einsiedeln. He has more than 2,000 mailed knights and perhaps 7,000 infantry with him. His column moves before dawn, cavalry at the front, expecting no serious opposition. The men of the forest cantons, Uri, Schwitz, and Unterwalden, are shepherds and dairy farmers. They own no armor, they wear rough wool and thick boots, they carry hunting bows, spears, and a weapon that is only just being taken seriously in the wider world. The halberd, a polearm 6 to 8 feet long, tipped with an axe blade, a spike, and a hook on the reverse. In the hands of a strong man, it can cut through mail, split helmets, and with the hook, drag an armored knight off a horse in a single motion. The Swiss have chosen their ground with the same care their grandfathers used to choose grazing meadows. They have blocked the track ahead of the Austrian column with a rough barricade of logs. And they have positioned themselves not in the pass, but above it, on the wooded slope, out of sight of Leopold's scouts. When Leopold's van reaches the barricade and stops when the whole column concertinas into itself along the narrow shore, when the knights cannot ride forward and cannot swing sideways, and cannot see anything but the horse in front, that is when the Swiss let the mountain fall on them. Logs come first, long spinning trunks that pick up terrifying speed on the steep slope, then boulders, ice slick, house-sized, crashing down through the ranks of men and horses like divine punishment. The screams start before the Swiss even reach the track, and then, roaring down through the smashed wreckage of the column, come the halberdiers. About 1,300 men from Schwyz, 200 from Uri, others from Unterwalden, running downhill with the mad courage of men defending their homes and their families, they wade into the packed, panicking mass of knights. Halberd hooks find gaps in armor and drag riders from saddles. Axe blades come down on helmets, spikes punch through visors, knights on horseback cannot turn, cannot charge, cannot even reach the enemy over the crush of their own men. Many, driven off the track, by the assault blunder into the marsh at the edge of the lake and vanish into the freezing water. Armor becomes an anchor. They drown by the dozen, faces down in the icy shallows. Leopold's rear ranks. The peasant levies from the Habsburg towns see what is happening at the front and simply run. They flee back towards Zug, throwing away weapons and shields to move faster. About 1,500 Habsburg soldiers, many of them nobles, are killed at Morgarten. Swiss losses are so light, some chroniclers cannot count more than a dozen. Leopold himself escapes on a fast horse, one of the few of his rank who lives to see Christmas. He arrives back at his court, white-faced and mute. Less than a month later, on December 9th, 1315, the three forest cantons renew their oath of alliance at Brunnen. Their little confederation, which the Habsburgs came to destroy, is now a nation. And on that day, the halberd becomes, for a full century, the most feared infantry weapon in Europe. Morgarten was the mountain lesson, but the plains still belonged to the knight. Until, 31 years later, on a ridge in northern France, the English king brought a weapon that could kill a nobleman before he was even close enough to see the archer's face. It made the mountain unnecessary. That story is next. Number 6. Crecy. August 26, 1346, a ridge in the county of Poitiers in northern France between the villages of Crecy and Agincourt. Wheat fields in the golden late summer light. A road climbing up the slope. And at the crest of the ridge, King Edward III of England has drawn up his invasion army in a shape no French commander recognizes as a battle line. Edward has landed in Normandy in July with somewhere around 14,000 men, perhaps 4,000 knights and men-at-arms, about 7,000 English and Welsh longbowmen, a few thousand spearmen, and in an innovation that shocks his own knights, several primitive cannon, small rebaldachines, still hot from the foundries of Ghent. He has burned his way across Normandy, marched more than 300 miles, and now, exhausted, he has turned to face the pursuing French army of King Philip VI. Philip's army may be as large as 30,000 or even 60,000 men. It includes the Duke of Alencon, the King of the Romans, the displaced King of Majorca, and most famously the 50-year-old King John of Bohemia. John is completely blind, he has been for a decade, but he has come to fight anyway. The English fight on foot. This is the first shock. Edward has ordered his knights to dismount and stand shoulder to shoulder with the common men-at-arms. On the flanks. In wedge formations, Froissart calls the shape of a harrow. His longbowmen have driven sharpened stakes into the ground and dug small pits and scattered caltrops in front of themselves. Every archer has 2 sheaves of arrows at his feet. His son, the 16-year-old Prince Edward, later called the Black Prince, commands the right wing. Edward himself watches from a windmill above the field. Late in the afternoon, a summer thunderstorm sweeps across the ridge. Rain lashes the field. The Genoese crossbowmen at the head of the French army, some 6,000 mercenaries under Antonio Doria and Carlo Grimaldi, feel their crossbow strings slacken in the wet. The English longbowmen, drilled to unstring their bows in bad weather, simply keep their strings under their helmets and restring them before the rain stops. Then the sun comes out, directly behind the English. Philip, with the arrogance of a man who has never lost, orders the Genoese forward. Their bowstrings are wet. They shoot short. The English longbows, dry, snap upward from behind the sharpened stakes. The historian Jean Froissart records that the arrows fell so thick they looked like snow. Longbowmen at Crecy can lose 10 or 12 arrows a minute. Multiply that by 7,000 archers. That is around 70,000 to 80,000 arrows in the sky every 60 seconds. The Genoese break within minutes, and the French knights behind them, contemptuous of the mercenaries' cowardice, ride them down. Then the French chivalry itself charges into the storm of arrows. Bodkin-tipped shafts punch through mail. Horses go down screaming, kicking, blocking the ridge. The Duke of Alencon, Charles II, dies with his household, and then into that maelstrom comes the blind king, John of Bohemia. Hearing that the day is being lost, orders his knights to strap the reins of their horses to his. He commands them to lead him where the fighting is thickest. He wants to strike, he says, at least one blow with his sword. The knights obey. They ride into the storm of arrows with the blind king at the center. All of them are killed. John is trampled to death by the horses roped to his own. When his body is found the next day, his knights are still tied to him in a ring, all of them dead, all of them faithful. Prince Edward of Wales, whose men killed the blind king, is so moved by the story that he adopts John's crest of 3 ostrich feathers and his motto, Ich dien, I serve, as his own. To this day, the Prince of Wales bears the crest of a blind king killed at Crecy. The French assaults continue into the darkness, perhaps 15 or 16 successive charges into the wall of arrows, all broken, all slaughtered. When the sun rises on August 27th, the ridge is carpeted with dead men and horses. The French have lost, by conservative estimates, more than 1,500 men-at-arms and thousands of infantry. Some counts put French dead as high as 4,000 knights and 10,000 to 15,000 total. English losses are perhaps 300. Crecy is where the peasant with a bow becomes, publicly and undeniably, the master of the noble on horseback. King Philip flees the field with an arrow in his jaw. He will not fight another pitched battle, but the French crown will not learn the lesson. 10 years later, at another hedgerow in another French field, France's own king would ride to disaster with the same tactics and the same result. And this time, it would be the king himself who paid. Number 5, Poitiers, September 19th, 1356. 10 years since Crecy, a hawthorn hedgerow, thick and thorny, running along a low ridge in west-central France, near the village of Noailles-Maupertuis. On the ridge, dug in behind the hedge, with archers on the flanks, the Black Prince waits. Edward of Woodstock, the man who watched the blind king die, is now 26 years old and in his first independent command. He has 6,000 men, English and Gascon, riding a great chevauchée through the French heartland, burning and looting. He is tired, his men are sick, and behind him, blocking his road home, is a French army of 14,000 to 16,000, led by the king himself. King John II of France, called John the Good, has learned exactly the wrong lessons from Crecy. He knows the English archers destroyed his father's cavalry, so he has ordered his knights to dismount and attack on foot, in full plate up a slope, across marshy ground, toward that hawthorn hedge. He has forgotten every advantage his numbers give him. He has forgotten that his own Scottish advisor, William Douglas, has told him to starve the English out rather than assault them. He wants glory. He is a king. Kings do not besiege. Kings charge. The French van, nominally led by the Dauphin Charles, but commanded in the field by senior nobles like John de Clermont, moves first. As they toil up the slope in their heavy armor, the English longbowmen on the flanks pour arrows into their side, men fall. Formations break. Those who reach the hedge find English men-at-arms behind it who are fresh dry and standing on high ground. They are hurled back. The 2nd French Division, under the Duke of Orleans, sees the 1st Division streaming down the ridge and extraordinarily panics and quits the field without engaging. Now only the largest division is left. And it is led on foot by King John II of France himself, wearing a coat of arms so distinctive it acts as a beacon on the field. The Black Prince waits until John's exhausted division has closed with his line. Then he does something no textbook of chivalry can predict. He orders a small mounted reserve under Jean de Grailly, the Captal de Buch, to swing wide around the French flank, dismount their own men-at-arms to attack the front, and charge the French rear. The French king's division is caught between the hedge and the horsemen. English archers, running out of arrows, drop their bows, draw hatchets and mallets, and wade into the melee. In the crush around King John, the coats of arms shine like targets. Denis de Morbec, an exiled French knight fighting for the English, pushes through the fighting toward the king. He shouts in French. He tells the king he is a knight of Artois, and it would be better for him to yield to a fellow Frenchman than to some Englishman who does not know his rank. The King of France yields. His 14-year-old son Philip, called Philip the Bold, is captured beside him, still swinging a sword at the men trying to drag his father down. When it is over, more than 4,500 French men-at-arms are dead or captured. English losses are perhaps 40 men-at-arms and an unknown but far smaller number of infantry. That night, in the Black Prince's tent, the King of France dines with the man who has just destroyed his army. The Black Prince, in a display of chivalry that the world will remember, insists on serving the king himself as a squire refusing to sit at the same table, because, he says, he is not worthy. It is a beautiful gesture. It hides a monstrous fact. The King of France is now a hostage. The English will demand 4 million gold crowns for his return. That is more money than the entire annual income of the Kingdom of France. When negotiations settle in the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360, the ransom is reduced to 3 million crowns, and vast territories in France are surrendered to English rule. King John II will be imprisoned in Berkhamsted Castle, then moved elsewhere. Portions of the ransom will be paid. Then, when one of his hostage sons breaks parole, John the Good, in a final act of what he calls chivalry, returns voluntarily to captivity in England. He dies there in 1364, a king who broke his own kingdom because he refused to learn from a battle 10 years old. Peasants with bows, farmers and shepherds turned archer have now killed one king and captured another. But the lesson is still being taught. And in 1385, another king would ride into a field where a common baker with a bread shovel would enter the history of a nation. Number 4, Aljubarrota, August 14th, 1385. A hot, dusty plateau in central Portugal, near the road between Leiria and Alcobaça. The temperature is punishing. The dry summer air shimmers over rocks, and on a low, flat-topped hill ringed by streams and thickets, the Portuguese have dug in. Portugal is a country that, in a sense, does not yet exist. King Ferdinand I died in 1383 without a male heir. His daughter Beatrice was married to King John I of Castile, and Castile claims that its king, by marriage, now inherits Portugal itself. The Portuguese, from the nobility down to the merchants of Lisbon, refuse. They rally around João, the illegitimate half-brother of the dead king, the Grand Master of the Aviz Order. In April 1385, the Cortes at Coimbra proclaim him King John I of Portugal. In response, King John I of Castile invades with an army of some 31,000 men, including thousands of Castilian knights, Aragonese noblemen, Italian mercenaries, and, most dangerously, a strong contingent of French cavalry. Against them, King John I of Portugal can muster perhaps 7,000 to 10,000 men. About 200 are English longbowmen, veterans sent by John of Gaunt as part of the emerging Anglo-Portuguese alliance. The rest are Portuguese knights, town militias, and levies, farmers with spears, fishermen with bills, common men who have decided they would rather die Portuguese than live Castilian. Their commander in the field is one of the great captains of the age, Nuno Alvares Pereira, the Holy Constable, 25 years old, deeply religious, tactically brilliant, he has studied Crecy and Poitiers with English advisors. He chooses the hill at Seo Jorge with the same precision. Dismounted men-at-arms in the center, English archers, and Portuguese crossbowmen on the flanks. Streams and ditches to break cavalry. Ordinary town levies as a reserve behind the line. When the Castilians arrive in the punishing summer afternoon, they are already exhausted. Their army has marched hard. Their armor is baking. Their French cavalry advisors are furious, warning John of Castile that the position is a trap and the men need water and rest. King John of Castile ignores them. He gives the order to attack. The battle lasts, in the fierce phase of its main melee, little more than an hour. The Portuguese and English archers, from perhaps 400 yards, begin loosing volleys into the Castilian ranks. Contemporary Portuguese chroniclers estimate that 200,000 arrows are shot that day. Castilian formations break under the storm. French cavalry that reaches the Portuguese line is impaled on stakes dragged from horses, hacked down by billmen. The Castilian center, driven forward by their king, crashes into the Portuguese dismounted men-at-arms in the sun and dies in the crush. King John of Castile sees his army being destroyed and flees the field. He escapes on a fresh horse toward Santarem. Behind him, thousands of Castilian noblemen and men-at-arms are killed or captured. And here, out of the smoke of that afternoon, a legend is born. As Castilian stragglers try to flee back across the countryside, they take shelter in Portuguese villages, hoping to find water and hiding places. In the nearby town of Aljubarrota, they enter a bakery. The baker is not home. His wife is. Her name, in the legend, is Brights de Almeida. She was born in Faro in the Algarve. She is said to be enormously tall, enormously strong, with 6 fingers on each hand. She has led a life so hard that no one has ever intimidated her. She sees the Castilian soldiers. She counts them, and the number in the story is 7. And she takes the great wooden peel she uses to slide bread into her oven, the padu padero, and she kills them with it, all 7, in her bakery, alone. Whether she was a single woman, several women, or a symbolic composite of the townspeople who fell on isolated Castilian stragglers with kitchen tools and farm implements does not truly matter. What matters is what the legend meant. It meant that when the nobility of Portugal held the ridge, the common people of Portugal held the streets. It meant that even a baker's wife with a bread shovel had killed the invaders of her country. The Padera de Aljubarrota, the baker of Aljubarrota, becomes a national heroine. Statues rise to her. Streets bear her name. To commemorate the victory, King John I orders the construction of the monastery of Batalla, the monastery of the battle, one of the great masterpieces of Gothic architecture in Europe. The House of Aviz is confirmed on the throne. Portugal remains independent. And in the barns and bakeries and blacksmith shops of a small nation, common men and women learn that they, and not just the noblemen on horses, are what makes a country. Aljubarrota was the end of Castile's Portuguese ambitions. But in the mountains of Central Europe, another battle a year later would be even worse for the aristocracy. Because at Sempach, an entire generation of Austrian dukes and nobles would die on foot in the summer heat, at the hands of the same peasants who had ambushed the Habsburgs 71 years before. Number 3, Sempach, July 9th, 1386. A gentle hillside above Lake Sempach in central Switzerland, near the town of Meyersholtz. The sun is high, the temperature climbs into the 90s, and, along the road, from Sempach marches an Austrian army that has come to end the Swiss experiment forever. It is led by Duke Leopold III of Austria, the nephew of the Duke Leopold who lost his knights at Morgarten a lifetime ago. Leopold III is called a chivalric prince, one of the most accomplished military men of his time. He has learned, or thinks he has learned, from the Morgarten disaster. This time, his knights will not be ambushed in a pass. They will fight on open ground, and he has learned another lesson too. One that he has taken from the reports of Crecy and Aljubarrota. He knows that armored knights on horseback die under longbow arrows and on Swiss pikes, so he does something audacious. He orders his knights to dismount and fight on foot, shoulder to shoulder, in a solid line of dismounted men-at-arms. They will meet the Swiss halberd with the knightly lance held horizontally like a hedge of spears and grind the peasants down. He has 4,000 men, of whom 1,500 are heavily armored knights. Against him marched roughly 1,500 halberdiers of the forest cantons under Peterman von Gundoldingen of Lucerne. When the two forces meet on a wooded hillside outside the town, the Swiss make their first charge. And it fails. Leopold has done his homework. His dismounted knights, standing in a solid line, with lances leveled outward, are a wall of steel points. The Swiss halberds cannot reach the men behind the lances. The Swiss vanguard loses men. Their charge stalls. Their formation begins to lose cohesion. For perhaps an hour, the Swiss appear to be losing. And then, according to a legend that grew up decades later, one man breaks the deadlock. Arnold von Winkelried, so the story goes, steps forward from the Swiss ranks, cries a farewell to his wife and children, and shouts to his comrades to take care of his family. Then he throws himself forward against the Austrian lances. He seizes as many spear shafts as his arms can hold and pulls them down into his own body, opening a gap in the wall of steel through which his fellow halberdiers pour. Historians debate whether Winkelried was a real man or a symbol of collective heroism. Chronicles from the time of the battle do not name him. His story appears in Swiss writing generations later. What is not in doubt is what happens next. The Austrian line breaks. And once it breaks, the peculiar horror of dismounted armored combat in high summer takes over. Leopold's knights are wearing 60 pounds of plate and mail. They have been standing in the July sun for over an hour. They cannot breathe through their visored helmets. Their squires have led their horses off, so they cannot retreat mounted. They cannot run in full armor. And now the halberd, that dreadful axe on a pole, comes down on them again and again. Hooks catch armored ankles and drag men down. Axe blades split helmets. Spikes punch through breastplates at close range. Knights suffocate inside their own armor from heat exhaustion before the halberds even reach them. Leopold himself refuses to flee. His squire is said to have brought him a horse and begged him to escape. Leopold sees his knights, the sons of the great houses of Habsburg, Zollern-Baden, Toggenburg, dying by the hundreds. He will not survive them. He leaps from the offered horse and pushes into the melee on foot. He is killed. About 400 nobles and knights die around him. Total Austrian losses are perhaps 1,500 men. Swiss losses are perhaps 200 to 600. The Habsburg cause in western Switzerland is broken. Whole noble houses are extinguished on a single afternoon. In the next generation, the Habsburgs will be forced to accept in humiliating treaties the independence of the cantons. Sempach is the battle at which Europe realizes that a Swiss confederation of shepherds and townsmen can annihilate the flower of a great dynasty in a single hour and do it in full daylight, on open ground, against a general who has learned every lesson that could be learned about how to fight them. The halberd becomes the most feared infantry weapon in Christendom, and the Swiss themselves, within a generation, become the most sought-after mercenaries in Europe. Popes will hire them to guard the Vatican, a duty they perform to this day. But the education of the French monarchy was not yet complete. It had lost knights at Crecy, it had lost a king at Poitiers, and in 1415, on a wet October afternoon, it would lose the greatest generation of its nobility yet in mud so deep, men would suffocate standing up. Number 2, Agincourt. October 25th, 1415, the feast of Saints Crispin and Crispinian. A narrow, freshly plowed strip of land between the villages of Agincourt and Trémacourt in Picardy in northern France, hemmed in on both sides by dense forest. The rain has fallen for days. The field is a black, sucking bog, and along that plowed corridor, the last route home to English-held Calais King Henry V of England has been forced to a standstill. Henry landed in Normandy in August with about 12,000 men. His siege of Harfleur has cost him time and men. Dysentery, the bloody flux, has ravaged his camp so ferociously that some of his soldiers have cut away their own soiled undergarments to relieve themselves as they march. When he finally sets out for Calais on October 8th, he has perhaps 9,000 men left. By the time he reaches the field at Agincourt, after nearly 3 weeks of marching, some 260 miles through hostile country, he has around 6,000. Most of them archers, most of them sick, most of them starving. Blocking his road, glittering in the wet October light, is the French army. Estimates vary wildly, but the most careful modern counts put the French between 12,000 and 20,000 men, and even some careful contemporary chronicles suggest as many as 36,000. It includes the Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, the Duke of Orleans, the Duke of Bourbon, the Duke of Bar, and virtually every great house of the French crown. There are 18 knights who have sworn a vow before the battle to kill King Henry personally and knock the crown from his head. The French are so certain of victory that they have wagered on the ransom of the English king before the fighting begins. They have not learned from Crecy 60, 9 years earlier. They have not learned from Poitiers, 59 years earlier. They are packed into a narrow field where their numbers cannot deploy, and the ground beneath their armored feet is not ground. It is a soup of mud water and freshly turned soil that swallows a full-armored knight to his knees at every step. Henry orders his archers to plant sharpened stakes in front of themselves. He orders his 900 or so men-at-arms to dismount and take the center. And in a gesture that shocks his own captains, he walks out onto the field with a small escort to force the French to react. If the French will not attack, he will move his position forward. He advances the whole English army about 250 yards, then replants the stakes and waits, arrows loosed, taunting his enemy. The French, insulted, order the charge. Their mounted knights, only a fraction of what they had planned to send, wallow forward through the mud. Longbow arrows come down on them like sleet. The bodkin points punch through mail and, at close range, even through plate at bad angles. Horses go down screaming, kicking, blocking the advance behind them. Then come the dismounted French men-at-arms, wading through the mire in their beautiful, expensive plate driven forward by the mass of thousands more men behind them. The advance is not a charge. It is a slow, staggering procession, arrow-torn and mud-clogged. Even before they meet the English line, the French front rank is exhausted. When they finally reach Henry's men-at-arms, the fighting is brutal, but the crush behind them is worse. Rank after rank of French knights pushes into the melee. Those in front cannot retreat. Those behind cannot see what is happening. The battlefield becomes what one chronicler describes as a suffocating pileup of humanity. Knights who fall in the mud cannot rise. Their comrades trip over them, are pushed onto them by the ranks behind, and are pushed onto by others in turn. In some places, the piles of armored bodies grow taller than a man. And in those piles, unable to raise their arms, unable to move their heads, unable to lift their visors to breathe cleanly, men suffocate in their own armor while still upright. English archers, having emptied their quivers, throw down their bows, draw hatchets, mallets, daggers, and swarm forward. Peasant boys in filthy jerkins climb the piles of armored knights and stab through visors, kill with hammer blows, to the helmet drag stunned noblemen off the piles and slit their throats. It is not chivalry. It is butchery. When Henry hears that his baggage train has been attacked in the rear and that the third French line may still be regrouping, he does something even his own chroniclers regret. He orders the killing of French prisoners, hundreds of them, to prevent them rearming. His own noblemen refuse. His archers, who see no profit in ransom, obey. When the fighting ends, French casualties are somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 dead. The Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, is killed. 3 dukes are dead, 90 great lords, 1,500 knights, an entire generation of French leadership annihilated in an afternoon on a field the size of a large farm. English losses are perhaps 400 men, including the Duke of York, who is thought to have suffocated in his armor in the crush. Agincourt does not end the 100 Years' War, but it shatters the French crown so completely that within 5 years at the Treaty of Troyes, Henry V is named regent and heir to the King of France himself. And it prints, into the memory of Europe, an image that will never fully fade, the image of the flower of chivalry, silk banners still bright sinking face down in mud, killed by peasants with mallets. But even Agincourt was not the end. There was one more battle, 62 years later, in which the last great feudal prince of Europe would meet a peasant army in the snow. And what would be done to his body would be so grotesque, so final, that it would mark, in the coldest possible way, the burial of an entire age. Number 1. Nancy, January 5th, 1477. A frozen field outside the walls of the city of Nancy in the Duchy of Lorraine in blowing snow in the coldest hour of a bitter January. Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, is the richest prince in Europe. He rules a patchwork of the most valuable territory in the Christian world, from the vineyards of Burgundy to the wool towns of Flanders, to the ports of the Low Countries. His court is the most magnificent in Europe. His art collection is the finest anywhere. His ambition is enormous. He wants to weld his scattered lands into a great new kingdom between France and Germany, a middle kingdom, and he wants a royal crown to sit on his head. And for years, he has treated his enemies as though they can be crushed at will. He has treated the Swiss, most of all, as though they are lice on a dog. Twice already in 1476, the Swiss have shown him what they think of that opinion. At Grandson in March, they routed his army and made off with the largest treasure in Europe: gold plate, tapestries, gems, the priceless jewelry of the Burgundian court, hauled off in wagons to be sold in the markets of Bern and Basel. At Merton in June, they slaughtered his army in the field, killing perhaps 10,000 Burgundians in a single day. And still, Charles will not stop. He has reassembled a third army, smaller, worse, and marched it into Lorraine to besiege Nancy in the depths of winter. Nancy has been reoccupied by Duke René II of Lorraine, a young man who has done what Charles cannot. He has learned from the Swiss. René has hired Swiss halberdiers. He has combined them with his own Lorrainer men-at-arms and with contingents from the alliance of Alsatian and Rhineland cities. By January 4th, he has assembled a relief army of about 20,000 men marching on Nancy. Charles the Bold has perhaps 4,000 to 8,000 exhausted, freezing men left. His mercenaries have deserted. His artillery is short of powder. His camp is a wretched, icy huddle around a besieged city. He has been warned to retreat. He has been begged to retreat. He refuses. On the morning of January 5th, in a howling blizzard, the Swiss and Lorrainer relief army approaches Charles's positions. They divide into a vanguard, a main body, and a rear. The Swiss vanguard, about 7,000 halberdiers and pikemen, sweeps into the forest to the Burgundian right flank. The main body, coming down the main road, feints at the Burgundian front. And then, at a signal of the great alpine horns of the cantons, sounded 3 times through the snow, the Swiss vanguard smashes out of the woods into Charles's exposed flank. His artillery, dragged in through the freezing mud, can barely fire in the storm. His Italian mercenaries fold. His English archers loose their quivers and are overrun. His household cavalry, the last of his household knights, charges around the Duke to make one last stand. Charles, in gilded armor, over a scarlet surcoat, sword in hand, is heard by those closest to him to shout, over the storm, that he is fighting a spider who is everywhere at once. His army disintegrates in the snow. His household is cut down around him. In the panicked flight over a small frozen stream near the Meurthe River, Charles is unhorsed. He falls. A Swiss halberdier, a peasant with a farm laborer's shoulders, brings the weapon down on his head. The blow, according to the Burgundian chronicler Philippe de Comines and other sources, cleaves the Duke's skull from crown to chin. Lance points punch through his thighs and abdomen. He goes down into the freezing water of a small pond. He is stripped in the confused looting after the fighting of every ring and jewel and piece of armor. His body is left naked, face down, in the icy shallows, unrecognizable in the storm. When the fighting is over and Duke René's forces enter Nancy in triumph, no one knows what has happened to Charles. For 2 days, the frozen battlefield is combed. On January 8th, searchers find a body in a shallow pond near where the last stand of the household knights took place. It is naked, it is frozen into the ice, its head has been split from crown to chin. Its face has been half eaten away by wolves and other scavengers who have come out of the winter forest to feed on the dead. It cannot be identified by its face. The Duke's Italian physician, Matteo de Crecy, and one of Charles's pages are brought to the body. They identify the man who once was the richest prince in Europe by his old battle scars, by the long fingernails he was known to keep, by an ingrown toenail on his left foot, and by the gap in his teeth from an incisor lost in a hunting accident years before. That is how they know it is him. Charles the Bold is buried in a temporary tomb in Nancy. His only heir is his 19-year-old daughter, Mary of Burgundy. Within weeks, the King of France, Louis XI, invades the Burgundian duchy proper and claims it for the French crown. Mary marries Maximilian of Habsburg to save the rest of her inheritance. The rich Low Countries pass, through her marriage, into the Habsburg Empire. The dream of a great Middle Kingdom dies in the pond with Charles. And the age of chivalry, in any meaningful military sense, dies with him. Because the man who died at Nancy was not merely a duke. He was the last, greatest, most flamboyant expression of the medieval knightly ideal. He had lived like a hero of romance. He had spent his life trying to gather a knightly crusade against the Turks. He had believed, above everything, in the sacred glory of the mounted, armored, blood-royal knight. And he had been hacked down by a Swiss peasant with a farm implement stripped naked by looters, eaten by wolves, and identified by his fingernails. From Stirling Bridge to Nancy is 180 years. Across those 180 years, on riverbanks, in mountain passes, in the muddy fields of France, on the sun-baked hills of Portugal, common men weavers, and farmers, and butchers, and shepherds, and archers, and bakers learned that they could kill the greatest warriors of their age. They learned it with spears in schiltrons, with halberds in ambushes, with longbows on ridges, with gudendags in marshes, with bread shovels in bakeries. They learned that a nobleman's blood, once he was pulled off his horse, spilled onto the dirt the same as any other blood. They learned that his armor could be cracked open like a lobster's shell. They learned that his ransom was worth more alive, but that his corpse was worth something too. Chivalry, as an ideal, would live on for centuries in poetry and tournaments and gentlemen's clubs and cavalry regiments. But as a military fact, chivalry died in these 10 battles. It died in the Loop of the Forth, in the marshes of Courtrai, in the mud of Bannockburn, beside the icy shore of Lake Agincourt, on the ridge at Crecy, behind the hawthorn hedge at Poitiers, on the hot hill at Aljubarrota, in the July heat at Sempach, in the churned muck of Agincourt, in the snow at Nancy. And when it died, it took with it something enormous. A whole theory about who mattered in the world. A whole theory about who could and could not fight. A whole theory about the divine order of the human race, which held that the noble was above the peasant because God had made him so. The peasants of Europe, over 180 years, put that theory to the sword. They put it to the pike. They put it to the halberd, the longbow, the billhook, the bread shovel. And the world that came out of those 10 battles was for good and for ill, a world where a farm boy with the right weapon could kill a king. That was the true revolution of the late Middle Ages. Not gunpowder, not the printing press. It was the moment when common men proved, in blood, that the man on the horse was not divine. He was only a man. And a man in armor, in the wrong ground, with peasants around him, dies just like anybody else. If this journey through the death of chivalry has moved you, hit the like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people who love real, blood and mud medieval history. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next one, and turn on notifications so the algorithm cannot bury us. Drop a comment right now. Which of these 10 battles shocked you the most? Which one had you never heard of before? Which peasant, common man, or forgotten hero deserves their own full-length video? Tell us where in the world you are watching from too. Our community stretches across every continent, and every one of you is what keeps this channel finding, telling, and honoring these stories. Thank you for watching. The peasants who broke the knights of Europe deserve to be remembered by name, by battle, and by the fields they colored with the blood of their oppressors. We will see you in the next one.